Welcome everyone to day 3 of EA Global Summit 2021. This is Juhi again from organizing team. Thank you everyone once again for your time and efforts in joining us for this session. This session is by Johan Reto, presenting this session in compliance to manage processes, risks, and control using Sparx EA. Kindly be informed that we'll be muting all the participants throughout the session, and if anyone is having any queries during the session, please use the chat questions window to drop your questions to the speaker. Johan will be answering few questions over here, and the rest of the discussions will be taking place in dedicated meeting room for Johan in MS Teams. The link to MS Teams channel is posted in the chat window for your quick reference. Thank you once again for your continual support and interest in EA Global Summit 2021. Then looking forward for another effective session with Johan in this year's summit. Over to you, Johan, now.
Thank you, Yuhi.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a look at what I will be talking about. So, what is compliance and why use models for working with compliance? That's the question. I will then have a short presentation of the motivation why you should do this, and then we look into the solution, and I will do a demo in Sparx. And finally, we have some considerations and questions. So, hi, I'm Johan Ritter, and I've been using Sparx since 2000. I think the first version I used was 3.1, something like that. And I've been teaching EA since 2006. I work as a consultant with business development, enterprise architecture, enterprise design, and I'm usually a Sparx expert. And my thought of it is like, if you should be a really good carpenter, you really need to know your tools. I tried a lot of other tools, but it seems I always come back to Sparx. So what is compliance? Well, in general, compliance is the conformance to rules. So it simply means following rules. And the rules are defined in regulations. And there's a lot of them in different areas. And there will be more coming. So it's kind of an evolving story. You will have more and more rules and more regulations and more controls. So this is something you need to look into and to manage. So the problem, so how does actually a company cope with compliance? Well, yeah, you guessed it, Excel sheets. And Excel sheets are kind of a two-dimensional way of looking at things. And it kind of gets a bit messy after a while. So if you look into some of the problems, there's a lot of them. Well, the number of controls, they grow and generate a lot of extra work. There's not much traceability in Excel between processes and controls. You don't really know if you have the latest version of the Excel sheet, and changes are disconnected. So when you update one Excel sheet, no others are updated, and and this leads to an inefficiency. So in the worst case, you kind of just add more and more controls, and they actually do the same controls actually many times, which means that you become more and more inefficient, and that's not a good thing. So who's involved in this? Well, if you look from the customer's perspective, they expect you to be compliant. And management, they want their customers to trust them. And that's why they are dependent on being compliant. So management needs to follow up. They usually have a compliant officer who ensures that you follow the rules and measures the compliance. And then we have regulatory authorities that provide regulations and make audits. And in the bottom, we have the person working there, the employee, who needs to know what to follow these rules, and so we are compliant. And usually they do that by performing activities and doing controls. Here we could also add the business developer, who could provide processes and visualize activities and controls to measure efficiency. So the motivation why you should be compliant is because it benefits your customers and therefore also the company. We depend on our good reputation, and that's our customers' trust. That's why they trust us. Trust takes time to build and can easily be broken, and our customers expect nothing less than full compliance. Being compliant means avoiding sanctions from supervisory authorities, and we can continue our business. So it can be extremely costly to not being compliant, for example, to GDPR, as I think everyone knows. And well-functioning compliance strengthens the culture, which in turn helps us to safeguard our company. Following rules is not just the right things to do, it also makes good business sense. So there is really a good reason for being compliant and working with these controls and these risks and these regulations. So let's have a look at a solution on this. And I'd say this is not a complete, it's just a way of kind of steps we are taking to build this up. And there's many other aspects of being compliant. So let's have a look at all these documents. The first step could be that we collect the data and just import it to Sparx. When we have done that, we need to merge all the data we have imported into the already existing data in Sparx, and then analyze, review, and approve. I think this is really interesting and also very important to approve things. So the people who had written the data or collected the data, the controls and things, they are also involved in approving. Finally, we need to publish everything. We need to publish the processes with their controls. So we give the business people control. So it should be really, really simple to follow the process and know exactly what controls to do and exactly what's expected from you. That is how we can achieve compliance. And by making this so visual, it's easy to follow it. Okay, so the first step is just to collect them. But when you have collected them, you need to kind of format them. So, you know, when you write Excel sheets, they will become, everyone is different. So you need to have some kind of standard. Else it's impossible to import it into Sparx. So the next step is to import. And I use a different approach to this. I don't, unfortunately, I'm not using the MDG for Office. I use scripting. And the reason for that is that big companies, if you want to introduce a new tool, you have to package it, and then you have to distribute it, and then you have to, it's very costly for them to introduce new tools. So that's often not something you can do very quickly. So I would like to just tell you what it does. It's kind of something I wrote in 2013. It's an Excel parser. The first 4 lines opens a file dialog and asks you to enter which Excel file you'd like to use to import. The next 5 lines create an Excel object. So this actually creates and instantiates an Excel in the background. And here we load the file name into Excel. And then we activate it. So now we have Excel running in the background with all the data we want to have. After that, we specify which rows and columns to use. I usually do this. It's possible to ask Excel for it, but I prefer to put it in myself because then I know exactly which rows, where it will start and where it will end, and how many columns it will use. So here we can have the max rows. We have A5 to R, so it's the 5th row, and it's from A to R in the columns. That is what we will read into. And here we come to the magic, where we go through this boundary, the array here, and we call ourselves. We call a callback function with each column. So this is what we need to write to do some stuff with the data. We need to write a on-row callback. So by including this in our code and then calling the Excel parser and writing an on-row callback function, we can process the data coming from Excel and put it into our structure, put it into our diagrams, and whatever we would like to do with it. It's quite simple. And afterward, it just closes it and quits, and then it's complete. So these kind of 40 lines of code has been reused hundreds of times, I think, and it's really a simple way of getting Excel data into Sparx. So I hope this could be maybe a takeaway for some of you who want to load data into Sparx in a simple way. Okay, and the last thing here, when you write this on-row callback, you need MDG to set the stereotypes and make things look nice and tidy. Okay, so when we started this project, we had this. It was a Visio template, and this was the way they looked at processes. They had activities, they had automated activities, they had start, and they had controls. They are yellow here. So the first iteration, we created an MDG for the process, so we could model the processes. And this is the meta model. So a process can be connected to a process, start goes to a process, and end can only, a process can go to an end, but an end can't go back, and so forth. These are all the rules that is valid. And I know some of you can, I kind of like to put the visualization onto the meta model. If you have classes with stereotypes, I think it's harder to communicate it. But in this way, it looks a bit tidier. And the next iteration, we added the controls. And then we had to add some other elements that was not in here, like countries, line of business, risks, evidence, root causes, units, persons, and regulations. Okay, and if you'd like to do something like this, I could recommend getting the best out of an MDG by Phil Kelly, who did this last year. And I think that's a really great presentation. So if you're interested in digging down into the MDG development, have a look at that. Something to think about when you're designing your MDG is which metaclass to base your classes on. So class is the most common one. That's the one you use when you have attributes and add operations or things like that. So if you create an MDG for an information modeling, for example, then class is probably the best one. If you look into the features of a requirement, you can actually drag them and drop them onto something in your model, and it will create a realization connected to it. That's interesting. So what I did, I took the control and I used the requirement as a meta class, which means that I can drag and drop controls on activities. That's a really easy way to connect them. Unfortunately, I don't get the right stereotype, but well, it's at least something. Then we have objects. Objects are useful in some cases. For example, you might want to have many controls of the same type in the same diagram. That is not that good to do if you have, at least in a visual way, if you can only put one on the same diagram, which is a restriction in Sparx. So if you instead instantiate a control, you can have it many times, but then you will actually have a longer path from the relation to the activity through the object to the classifier class. But if you standardize the way you do it, then you can write the report knowing exactly that that's the way it's done. I think in this case, we are not doing that. We are more connecting the controls directly to the activities and not showing them in the diagram due to minimizing the complexity of how the process looks. Activity is also a metaclass which you can use, and that's usually used for flows, like process flows. And then you have text that's used for when you want to have a reference to somewhere else, maybe to a file for another diagram or hyperlink or whatever. So then you base your stereotype on the text, and then you have to create a pattern. And when you drop it, you use UML pattern silent to avoid having this pop-up window. So these are some things you should think about, because that's the tools you have in creating MDGs and giving them the way of working that you like. All right, so when you do an import script, you usually do it in 3 phases. And the first one is to pre-fill. I use dictionaries usually, so I go through the T-object table and I pick out all the countries, all the risks, all the regulations, and so that are already in the repository, because I don't want to make copies. The next step is to create a package structure where I can do importing and see all the new elements that are not already my model, because I don't want to put them in there directly. I want to analyze them first. And the third step is actually just to do the import and go through it and reuse all the existing elements or create new one when there's no one there. Yeah, and also create the diagrams that you'd like to have. And finally, you validate the script by running it and see if it works as you expect it to do. And when we come to the merge, I usually do it with the relationship matrix. I think it's easier, and also it's quick. And when you do it, you get the right stereotype on the relation. So I will show you that in the demo. It's of course possible to connect the controls to processes by using automation and look up the processes, but I don't really trust that, because you might have misspelled process name or something in the Excel sheet. So I prefer to know what's actually happening. And then you can then add the activity where it's done to the diagram. Now we come to the fun part, the analysis and looking to the traceability of this. So if you mark the control here, you can see how the CO5 is connected to base systems, to countries, etc. So if you, in your MDG, you could write what it should say on these lines here, used in countries and so forth, are all part of the MDG, which makes it really easy to read how everything is connected. Unfortunately, the traceability doesn't use the icons that are defined by the MDG. I don't know why. It looks very nice in the project browser, but not in the traceability. It shouldn't be that hard actually to fix that. I asked Sparx to fix that long ago, but nothing has happened so far. So maybe sometime we'll see yellow dots here and blue ones here, so it becomes a bit more easy to read also the traceability window. So this is really powerful actually. So you could click here on, you have CO5 here, it's used in Estonia, and then we can look into Estonia and see that it's also doing in another control here. CFO 14. We can look into which risks are addressed and look into the details of the risk, which roles instantiates, and which controls are done in this system. So we can expand also and see other controls here. And which controls are initiated by the reserving actuary, etc. So I think this is really nice. So when you do the first load, and then you do the second load, and so forth, you might find some interesting things happening. So I think this is really great. When you do this, you also need to analyze the contents and look into the flow of the process and see that these controls, are they done more than once? Why are they done more than once? You get a really great way of discussing about controls when you have them connected to the process. Yeah, and you can ask if the risk actually really minimizes due to these controls. Are they done the same in all countries? You can do a lot of analysis, and then you can create reports. You can create reports and from a regulation, for example, that goes through and shows all the controls that are done and in which processes they are done and which risks they address and things like that. And I believe it's really important to also approve the controls and the risks. So all the elements that we put into the model should be approved, and we should ask all the questions that we find if something isn't really looking as it should be. And the last step here is to publish. And in this case, I did this in HTML. I would love to do this in Web EA. I usually do that, or in Prolaborate, do that too. But in this case, we didn't have any of these tools. And due to other reasons, we used HTML. We wanted to have it really, really simple. So we wrote our own version of this template, the web template, so that we removed a lot of information. So the user should only have the information they need. We removed the browser, so you don't have the browser in the HTML. So in the end, we have a really simple way of communicating. And as you can see, there is some icons up here to the left in the published web. There's no browser here. The home is to the start page, and the back button here is kind of up one step from the process. And the Word document, if you click on that, it will download the Word document that is generated from this process. So everything has to do with simplicity and try to really just have the information that you need at your fingertips when you're performing the work. Which systems are we working with? What am I supposed to do? Which control should I do? And so forth. So we are really focusing on this. This is really what's done. Every other level of processes is more analysis of in which order we do things, what dependencies do we have. This is really what they do. So let's have a look into Sparx. Let's see here. Okay, let's go here. I was a bit stressed today because it was delayed, and I thought I was the only one in this presentation. But well, so this is the starting point. I have a structure up here. This is the company structure, EA Global Summit, and then we have common quality assured assets. And here we have the start page and the business architecture. Here are the common business assets, like countries in our part of the world. We have Denmark, Estonia, Finland, etc. So this is in the Northern Europe. Lines of businesses, we have organizations, regulations, and systems. these are already in the model. So there's one thing that's common for the whole business architecture. Then we have something that's common for only the finance department. That's so down here we have the controls and risks and roles that are for the finance. So they are not up in the common part. So I think this is a great way of working. We work in Lemon Tree. You have a lot of EIP files or repositories. We have only one. So everyone is working the same repository. Usually we use security and a lot of things to make that possible and easy to work. Okay, so the first thing I will do now is quickly just look into the Excel sheet so you see what that's about. And I usually begin with the control name, so I can manipulate that and give it the name I want it and just count it up. And then it has the processes, countries, business, etc., and the regulation in the end here. So this is the input. To run a script, you use specialized scripts, and the script I running is RACM, that's risk and control matrix. So it starts with building the structure. And this is the dialog asking for the Excel sheet to open and in the background. And as I described before, click on open, and because it's already open, I need to close it. Okay, so now we open it again. And now it will start adding elements into the structure and creating the diagrams. I think this file originally contained 250 controls. I just put 21 in there. So we don't need to wait too long. If you have more time, you can do this and go to lunch, and then when you come back, you have all the 250 controls in there. Okay, so it's soon finished. 17. On to go. Okay, so now it's done. Look at one of them and see it looks like this. So the next step, now when we have imported this, we can see that we have all the controls here. We have countries, we have evidences, we have line of business, organizations, persons, and so forth. All of these are new things. They are not in. They were not in our model before, but I don't want to approve them yet. I want to do the analysis and synthesis of the model first. So let's do go to the matrix. I usually do the connection here. I think it's the easiest way to connect things. So I will push up the Excel sheet here first, so we can know what we are supposed to do. So we can see that the first 11 controls should be connected to annuity reserves. Okay, let's do that. The first one, annuity reserve, create the relation like this, and up to 11. And here's this number 2, need to connect that, and then we take the rest. So that's the first 11 rows in the Excel sheet connected to the process. That's not that hard. And the next step is, of course, just to continue doing this until you have reached the end of the file. So here we can now do insert related elements. And this one, annuity reserve, is not in our diagram, so we add it. Okay, so now we can visually see also how the control is connected to a process from that perspective. We can, of course, find the process where it's in the process model easily also. Okay, so when we have connected everything, we need to have a look at all these new elements and see, well, what's this? All countries. What's all countries? Well, this is, of course, someone writing in an Excel sheet that they would like us to connect to countries, to Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Litauen, Norway, and Sweden. So we need to do that, and we will find a lot of these kind of interesting things here, like all lines of business. And here it seems to be 2 lines of business, MTPL and MOC. So maybe I should create a line of business called MTPL and one called MOC, and then replace this one in all places. And so I kind of have some analysis to do here and understanding. And so it's a way you could, of course, write a script that parses this and do, but doing that takes a lot of time, and sometimes it's really good to understand this and ask questions and not just do what the Excel sheet says all the time. So I think it's a good way to kind of build this small package here and see what we got and see how that affects our model and work that way. Well, so this is some kind of first look at the model. Maybe I think that could be enough for the demo so far. I won't show you the publishing. Everything here is kind of not very much behind it. It's just the names here, and everything is empty except this one. And here you can see how the process could look and the connections to the system and loading of files and things like that. Let's go back to the presentation. So this is the way the processes look, and here we can see that we have connected controls to the process. We have activities. We have this matrix in the background saying what's done each day. We have a hyperlink which gives us a way of going upwards. We can go to a start page. We have the diagram notes telling who's done this. We have the Word document link, which contains all of this in a document with all the controls and all the text. Of course, there's text behind everything here also. We have the systems. We have the information flow between the systems and the legend and notation explaining how this should be interpreted. So this is our context. This is where we put in the information, the data, everything that should help business people to know how this process works. And it's really great in many cases because you might have a process that you don't run very often. You don't remember how to do it since last time, or you might have a new employee who needs to learn how to do things. This is a structural capital for your company. If someone gets sick, you can always follow the process and do it. But if you have all the knowledge in their heads or in their Excel files that are on their hard disk, which is with them at home sick also, then it's, well, I think there's a lot of values here. And I think this is also very important to focus on just this view, because this is what people do. This is their work. They are doing this every month. They're doing this. Okay, I would just like to have a short discussion about the Word documents. I think they are really important because business people tend to want to read things. They're used to use Word and Excel sheets. especially on the finance department. So by auto-generating them, that is that we, I don't know if you're using this, but the resource document up here, if you click that, you set this up to generate the document you want, and you click resource document, and then you write like process, corporate, group, consulting, first run. So this will operate on this process and generate a specific file with a specific name as you have entered here. And then you go to the next process and you set that up and so forth. So all your documents are generated by right-clicking on finance. You can generate all finance process documentation and risk reports and everything. And that means that you don't even need to publish your new processes or anything. They will be accessible directly because this Word link here will point to the server, to the path where the document is lying. So when you generate this icon will give you what has been generated. And if the business developers and business people update the process and click regenerate, all these documents will be in sync. I think this is a really important thing to use. I really stress this. It's a great thing. And combining the links, the hyperlinks for files with the auto generation is really a great way of working. So to the conclusions, this is the top level, where starting page, where you have the process map. In that process map, you can see the overview of all processes, all departments, which business day, which department does what. So this is the flow through a month or a period of time through the business days. So you can see when you have done this, the next department will do that, and you can look into what they are doing, and they can see what you have done. And I think this is something really important. The things in the middle, the green ones, are the results, and the results have their own view. So you can click here and you can click on any of these results, and then you can see what is done before and what's using the result. That will be the process activities before and after. And then you have another filter here, the departmental view. So if you working at controlling, you can click there, and you will only see the processes in your swim lane. That's the only thing you will see. So you can see exactly what you're doing. And then you have the risk and control view, where you can look into the controls, which controls are done which day, and things like that. So the conclusions here is that I think it's, instead of using standards, you should adapt the tool to people. So start in that. Sometimes I also work as a mentor for enterprise architects, and they had decided to use Archimate. So then Archimate is the natural language for them, and that's great. In this case, the company already had a process modeling way of doing things, which meant that I have a story where I was working for a large company in Sweden that produced cars. And we did some BPM and modeling for the processes, and they said, well, that's not the process. So we asked them, can you show us one of your processes? And we saw that all of the elements were blue. So we went back and made all the BPM and elements blue. And we came back and showed them, oh yeah, that's our process. So just by giving things the colors, the forms, the way they are used to looking at things, they will accept the mods much easier and be able to read them. You don't have to learn them something new. I also believe very much in this automate model generation, kind of taking data, putting it into Sparx, and then analyzing it. And I think that's really efficient and good way of doing things, because you really use the data they already have. Sparx is a great tool for managed complexity, and controls are complex. There are lots of them. So this makes it possible for us to manage the complexity of controls in a good way. Many of the presentations has been involving people, and I know that this is really the core of everything, and if you don't do that, it won't work, because it's not your process, it's their process, and it's their controls. And if it looks like they're used to, then they will probably be accepted, and they will start using it, and then it's great. And when they come to you and say, hey, this process, we have changed the way we're working, can you update it? Well, that's when you have continuous improvement, and that's really, really great. And the core here is to make these models available, to generate them in any way, like HTML, Prolaborate, or whatever, keeping it simple and easy to understand and use. And I actually stole this from another presentation yesterday, I think it was. So what is knowledge? Well, knowledge is information, interpret and organize data put into context. So everything I've been talking about has been the process is our context. We put the context and we fill that with the information about what to control, what to do, etc. So making the models available and putting the knowledge there at their fingertips, that is what everything is. That's really when you succeed, when you get there and people really use it. That's when you get value from your models. If you don't make them available, they don't create any value. So I think it's time, and if anyone has any questions, please ask.
Yeah, thank you, Johan. So we have a question from Mario asking about how you build your diagram matrix in EA. Process example.
Okay, now I understand. Let's do this. You right-click on the diagram, swim lanes and matrices, click on matrices, activate that. And then you can kind of create new ones, and you can colorize them, and you can build up profiles and etc. So this is where you do it. Right-click on the background, matrix, and activate them. Then you have the matrix. Yep. Maybe I was too quick there.
Okay, thank you, Johan. So we'll wait for a couple more minutes for participants to drop their questions. Upon receiving the questions from participants, we will be pasting in your Solitaire channel in Microsoft Teams, and you please be available for a couple of minutes to have a discussion with the participants if there are any conversations initiated by them. So thank you, Johan. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending this session. So now Johan will be available in MS Teams to have a detailed discussions and answer any further questions in Microsoft Teams. The link to his channel is pasted in the chat window for your quick reference. The recording of this video will be available in eaglobalsummit.com with complete Q&A and the discussion underneath the video after this summit. And we will be notifying you all by email once it is made available. Thanks once again. And thank you, Johan. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.